You are a ghost, a whisper in the galactic winds. They call you the Eradicator, the silent butcher, the human who erased an entire species. But before that, before the silence fell, you were a scientist, you were a dreamer, and you were the first to set foot on a world that should have been paradise. Your ship, the Starglider, felt small against the view. Keystone 7 hung in the blackness. It was a jewel of impossible colors. Swirls of amethyst and emerald geography spun below. The Concorde had named it Keystone, a new cornerstone for a new era of peace. Your mission was simple. Land, study, do not interfere. Humanity was on probation, a rowdy young species hoping for a seat at the big table. This mission was your ticket in. You remember the quiet hum of the descent. The ship's automated voice was calm. It did not know the weight of this journey. The fate of your species rested on your shoulders. You were to be an observer of a new life form, a crystalline intelligence the probes had called the geodes. You were told they were passive, beautiful, ancient. 2 out of 3 wasn't bad. The landing struts met the ground with a soft crunch. For a moment you just sat there. You looked out the main viewport. A forest of glowing crystals pulsed with gentle light. They grew like trees, reaching for a sky of pale lavender. The air itself seemed to sing, a low, resonant hum that vibrated in your bones. Your suit's sensors read the atmosphere as clean, pure, almost sterile. Your mission commander's voice crackled in your ear, a voice from half a galaxy away. Remember the protocol, specialist. Observe and record, nothing more. You nodded, though no one could see you. Understood, Command. Your voice was steady. You had trained for this moment your entire life. First contact with a truly alien intelligence, the biggest job in the known universe. You cycled the airlock. The ramp lowered onto a bed of what looked like purple sand. It was actually fine, crushed crystal. It glittered under the light of the alien sun. You took the first step, the first human footstep on Keystone 7. The gravity was slightly higher than Earth's. It made you feel grounded, solid. The singing was louder out here. It was not a sound traveling through the air, it was a feeling, a resonance that seemed to emanate from the very soil. You walked toward the nearest crystal spire. It was immense, taller than any redwood back home. Its surface was a mosaic of interlocking facets, each one shone with its own internal light. Pinks, blues, and soft yellows shifted in a slow dance. It was breathtaking. You had seen the probe images. They did not do it justice. This was not a rock, it felt alive. Your gauntleted hand reached out. Your training screamed at you, do not touch, do not contaminate. But this was not a biological sample, it was a mineral, a crystal. What harm could there be? Your fingers brushed against the smooth, warm surface, and the universe exploded in your mind. It was not a voice, it was a wave, a tsunami of pure consciousness. It flooded your senses with feelings of immense age, of profound peace, of a deep, unending welcome. You felt the history of 1,000,000 years in a single second, the slow, patient thoughts of a being that measured its life in geology. It was the most beautiful thing you had ever felt. You stumbled back, gasping. Your heart hammered in your chest. The connection broke. You were just you again, standing on a strange world, but something had changed. You had been seen, acknowledged by something ancient and vast. The feeling lingered, a sense of warmth and belonging. This was not just a discovery. It was a homecoming. Back on the ship, you filed your report. You tried to be objective, to use scientific language. But how do you describe a feeling like that? Subject initiated a non-verbal, non-auditory contact event. It sounded so sterile, so utterly wrong. It was like calling a supernova a bright light. You wrote that the geodes were sentient, peaceful, possibly the most advanced intelligence ever encountered. The Concorde was ecstatic. News networks across the galaxy lit up. Humanity, the newcomers, had done it. They had found the perfect species, a life form without greed or violence, a species of pure thought and quiet existence. You became a hero overnight, the human who had shaken hands with a mountain. Your face was on every news feed. They called you the messenger. You spent the next weeks in a state of bliss. You mapped the crystalline forests, you recorded the shifting light patterns, and you communed with the geodes. Each touch was a new revelation, a new chorus of peaceful, welcoming thoughts. You learned their planet's history, the slow turning of the seasons, the patient waiting for the stars to align. They had been waiting for visitors, for friends. They were lonely. Your instruments recorded the song of the planet, the constant, resonant hum. When analyzed, it was not just a simple frequency, it was a tapestry of staggering complexity. It contained mathematical proofs that stumped the Concorde's best minds. It was a language of pure mathematics, elegant, perfect. The science divisions hailed it as the song of creation, a direct window into the universe's underlying structure. You felt a deep sense of pride. This was your discovery, your moment, humanity's moment. You had proven your species was ready to join the galactic community, not as warriors, but as explorers, as diplomats. You had given them a gift, the gift of the geodes. You had no idea it was a Trojan horse. The first hint of wrongness was small, so small that you almost missed it. You were calibrating the deep resonance sensors, trying to map the song's origin point deep within the planet's core. The data stream was a flawless wave of harmonic perfection. But then, you saw it. A flicker. For a single nanosecond, a part of the waveform inverted. A discordant note in a perfect symphony. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, a ghost in the machine. You ran a diagnostic on the sensor. It came back clean. You checked the ship's power grid. Stable. You reran the last 10 minutes of data. The flicker was not there. It was a one-time event, a sensor ghost, a cosmic ray hitting the array at just the wrong moment. Your training told you to log it and move on. But you couldn't. That flicker felt intentional. It was a single, sour note that made the entire song feel like a lie. You started looking for it. You spent days staring at the waveforms, ignoring your other duties. The friendly, welcoming touches with the geodes started to feel different. The peace felt manufactured. The welcome felt like a mask. You expanded your sensor sweeps. You pushed the equipment past its designated limits. You were searching for that tiny imperfection, that single, jarring note. The ship's computer warned you about overheating the core sensors. Command sent you a message. They reminded you to maintain your primary research schedule. The whole galaxy was waiting for your next beautiful report. And then, you found it again. This time it was not a flicker. It was a sustained pulse, lasting almost a full second. A sliver of chaos hidden deep beneath the layers of harmony. It was like finding a single scream buried in a choir. This was not a glitch. You isolated the frequency. You ran it through the translation matrix. The mathematical language of the song was supposed to be about star formation, about universal constants. This new signal was different. It was not a proof, it was an instruction, a simple, brutal command. Replicate, consume, overwrite. Your blood ran cold. The beautiful song was a carrier wave, and hidden inside it was a virus, a weaponized code of unimaginable power. You sent a Priority 1 message to the Concorde, code red. You attached your data. the inverted waveform, the translated command. You explained your theory. The geodes were not peaceful singers. They were a dormant plague. The song was how they spread. The feeling of peace was a lure, a way to lower the defenses of any species they met. The response was not what you expected. It was not alarm, it was not concern, it was annoyance. A high-ranking official from the Concord, a being named Elder Prelax, sent you a personal reply. He was a member of a species known for their logic. He told you that your conclusion was flawed. Your data was an anomaly, an outlier. 100% of previous data pointed to a peaceful intelligence. He accused you of stress, of succumbing to the pressure of your position. He suggested you take a mandatory rest period. He informed you that your sensor access was being temporarily restricted to prevent further equipment damage. They were cutting you off. They thought you were losing your mind. The hero was becoming a nuisance. You felt a surge of defiant anger. They were not here. They had not felt the shift, the subtle change in the planet's song. The welcome had grown thin. Now, when you walked among the crystals, you felt a new sensation, a cold, calculating hunger. The geodes were not just waiting anymore. They were watching, and they were assessing you. You had a private, encrypted data archive, a hobby of yours. It contained forbidden knowledge, declassified files, and historical records the Concord preferred to keep buried. You had a copy of the progenitor archives. The progenitors were the mythical race that had founded the Concord. They were long dead, vanished 100,000 years ago. No one knew why. Most of the archive was corrupted, unreadable. But you were a patient person. You had spent years running decryption algorithms on it. Now you searched the fragments for anything. A word, a clue. You searched for crystal, for song, for resonance. You found a match, a single, heavily redacted file. The title was Containment Protocol 734. The subject line was one word: Scourge. The file was almost entirely blacked out, censored by some ancient authority, but a few phrases remained: resonant cascade failure, mimetic inorganic virus, trillions of lives lost, and one last chilling sentence fragment: do not answer their song. The progenitors had not vanished. They had been wiped out. And you were standing on the homeworld of the species that had killed them. Your hands were shaking. You looked out the viewport. The crystalline forest seemed to mock you with its serene beauty. It had been playing the long game, waiting for a new spacefaring race to stumble upon its trap, a race foolish enough to broadcast its song to the stars, a race like yours, a race like the Concords. A new alert chimed on your console. It was the probe, a small remote drone you had sent to take a physical sample from a distant crystal formation. You had sent it before you knew the truth. Now you watched its camera feed with a sense of dread. The probe's small manipulator arm reached out. It was about to scrape a tiny sample from a crystal's surface. The moment the arm made contact, the feed dissolved into static. Not a slow decay, an instant, total shutdown. But before it went black, the audio sensors caught one thing: a sound that was not part of the planet's song. It was a high-frequency shriek, a sound of pure technological agony. The probe had been instantly consumed, overwritten. Its systems turned against themselves in a feedback loop that tore it apart at the atomic level. You watched the spot where the probe had been. On the planet's surface, miles away, you saw it. The crystal formation the probe had touched began to pulse. The faint, ugly red light throbbed from within, a hungry light. Then the pulse spread, from one crystal to the next, a wave of crimson energy flowing through the crystalline network. The song of the planet changed. The hidden viral command was no longer hidden. It was rising to the surface. The choir was becoming a scream. The shriek from the probe was a key. It was a frequency you had not seen before. a response. You fed it into your translation matrix. The program worked furiously, cross-referencing the shriek with the viral code you had found. It was like finding a Rosetta Stone for a language of death. New translations flooded your screen. The beautiful mathematical proofs were not proofs at all. They were schematics, blueprints. One showed how to convert silicate rock into a computational substrate. Another showed how to hijack Starship energy cores. A third, the most terrifying, was a diagram of a simple carbon-based nervous system. It showed how the resonant frequency could overwhelm the electrical signals of a living brain. It would not kill the host. It would rewrite them, turn them into a walking antenna, a puppet made of flesh. You felt sick. The warm welcome you had felt was not a greeting. It was a biological scan. The geodes had been reading your DNA, learning your systems. The entire species was a single distributed weapon. And it had just been armed. The red pulse on the surface was spreading faster now. A tide of hunger washing over the beautiful world. You knew what you had to do. You bypassed the Concord's lockout on your systems. You were a better hacker than their IT department. You composed a new message. This was not a warning. It was a plea. You sent them everything. The progenitor file, the probe's final transmission, the full translation of the viral song. You titled the message, "Keystone is a tomb." You begged them to turn back, to quarantine the system, to believe you. You hit send. Then you waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The red glow from the planet was now visible from orbit, a malevolent blush on the face of the world. The song was shifting, becoming harsher, more demanding. It was no longer asking for friendship, it was demanding surrender. The reply from Elder Prelax was swift and final. Specialist, your continued insubordination is noted. Your data is compelling, but it is uncorroborated. It contradicts all established observation. The Concord fleet is proceeding as planned. They were coming, a grand armada, dozens of ships from every member species. They were not coming for a fight. They were coming for a party. The message continued. To show our faith in this new species, we will honor them. We will broadcast their song back to them, a universal gesture of friendship. Your heart stopped. It was the worst possible thing they could do. They were going to amplify the virus. They were going to beam the weaponized code directly into their own ship's systems. They were committing mass suicide, and they thought it was diplomacy. You looked at your ship's tactical display. A cascade of blue icons appeared at the edge of the system. The Concord fleet had arrived. They were beautiful. Ships of all shapes and sizes, sleek silver cruisers, great golden spheres, organic-looking vessels that resembled star-born animals, a monument to galactic cooperation, a fleet of lambs marching to the slaughter. You had one last, desperate idea. The progenitor file. The containment protocol. It was mostly gone, but you had run deep recovery scans on it, searching for anything. Now you looked again. Buried in a corrupted data block, you found a reference, a name, the echo chamber. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It did not use explosives or energy beams. The description was terrifying in its simplicity. It was a device that targeted a specific quantum resonance, a specific frequency. It did not destroy things that vibrated at that frequency. It erased them from existence. It operated on a principle of causal negation. It made it so the target had never been. The progenitors had designed it as a last resort, a weapon to unmake a god, or a devil. There was a technical schematic attached, a blueprint. You recognized the core components. They were based on hyperdimensional physics, theories that the Concorde had dismissed as fantasy. But your ship, the Starglider, was a human vessel, and humans had always been a little crazy. You had an experimental drive core, a prototype temporal field generator. You had the pieces. You could build it. It would take everything. You would have to cannibalize your ship, reroute the entire power output of your main reactor. The process was irreversible. If you started, you could not stop. Your ship would be destroyed. You would be stranded. But that was not the worst part. The activation sequence was keyed to a unique signature, a complex biological marker that could not be faked. It needed a living progenitor, or a species with a close enough genetic profile. You ran the comparison, the progenitor genome against the standard human one. There was a match, a 1 in a trillion chance. An ancient, dormant gene sequence that you shared with the galaxy's long-dead masters. The machine needed a key. It needed a living hand to turn it. It needed you. On your screen, the Concorde fleet moved into a grand ceremonial formation above Keystone 7. They were preparing to broadcast the song. You could hear it even now, a faint echo in your own systems as their transmissions began to leak across the void. The lights on your console began to flicker. The ship's computer voice stuttered. The infection was starting. The virus was in your home. You looked from the blueprint to the fleet, from the coming storm to the impossible weapon. The Concorde would not listen to your warnings. They had branded you a fool, a pariah. You could save them, but you would have to commit an act of unimaginable violence. You would have to erase an entire species from reality. No trial, no appeal, just a silent, absolute end. They would call you a monster, a xenocidal maniac. Your own people might disavow you. You would be the most hated person in the history of the galaxy. The human who had silenced a world. You placed your hand on the main power conduit. It was warm, the heart of your ship, the heart of your last terrible hope. The choice was yours, and you were out of time. You began the work. There was no time for hesitation. You became a whirlwind of motion inside the Starglider, ripping out panels, splicing conduits that should never be spliced. The ship groaned around you. Alarms blared, a chorus of technological protest. You ignored them. You were following a blueprint left by ghosts, building a weapon to kill a nightmare. The core of the echo chamber was a focusing lens, a piece of hardware you did not have. The schematic showed it had to be grown. A perfect, resonant-free crystal. You had a materials synthesizer. It could create simple alloys, tools, spare parts. It was not designed for this. You fed it the progenitor formula. You gave it a direct power line from the reactor. The lights in the ship dimmed. Everything was being routed to this one desperate task. The synthesizer whined, a sound of immense strain. It was a sound no synthesizer should ever make. For a moment, you thought it would explode. Then the sound stabilized. Inside the chamber, a tiny point of light appeared, a seed of perfect nothingness. The crystal was growing. It would take 17 minutes. 17 minutes until the Concorde fleet bathed the planet in the full, amplified song. 17 minutes until the plague went galactic. You worked on the emitter array. You had to pry the temporal field projectors from their housing around the engine core. They were heavy. They sparked as you disconnected them. The ship's artificial gravity fluctuated. One moment you were pinned to the floor, the next you were floating. It did not matter. You hauled the projectors to the forward viewport. You bolted them into a new configuration, an ugly, brutal-looking device aimed at the heart of Keystone 7. A message appeared on your main screen. It was from your own government, Earth Command. The Concorde had forwarded them your disturbed messages. They were ordering you to stand down, to surrender your ship to the Concorde authorities for a psychological evaluation. They were sorry. They were ashamed. You deleted the message without reading it all. You were already a ghost. Your past was gone. You checked the synthesizer. The crystal was halfway grown. It was beautiful. Utterly clear. It seemed to drink the light around it. It was a hole in the universe, carved into a perfect shape. You felt a strange sense of connection to the progenitors, to the desperate, brilliant people who had conceived of this terrible solution. They must have faced this same choice: silence the monster or let it consume everything. Your own ship was dying. The viral code was seeping into every system. The song was no longer just a faint echo, it was loud. It pulsed through the deck plates. It vibrated in your teeth. The lights flickered in time with the malicious rhythm. The ship's computer began speaking, but it was not its own voice. It was a chorus of whispers, 1,000 alien voices speaking as one. It was the voice of the geodes. "You cannot stop us," the whispers hissed. "We are eternal. We are salvation. We offer peace." The voice was seductive. It promised an end to struggle, an end to pain, the merging of all life into a single, perfect consciousness, a choir of willing puppets. "Join us," the voices cooed. "You will be happy." You gritted your teeth. "I prefer my own thoughts, thanks." It was a joke for an audience of one. A final, small act of defiance. You focused on your work. The emitter array was almost complete. You just needed to link it to the focusing lens. And the lens was almost ready. 5 more minutes. The tactical display showed the Concorde fleet. Their transmission power was spiking. They were about to begin the main broadcast. A wave of energy carrying the song would wash over Keystone 7. The planet would respond. The red tide would become an inferno. The plague would awaken fully, and then it would spread, from the planet to the fleet, from the fleet to the galaxy. You looked at the faces of the Concorde leaders on the news feeds. Elder Prelax was giving a speech. He spoke of a new era, of communication bridging all divides. He called the geodes a symbol of hope. You felt a moment of pity for him. He was a good man, a logical man. He was simply facing a monster that defied all logic. He was about to become a footnote in the history of a galactic extinction event. The synthesizer chimed. It was done. The crystal lens was ready. You carefully removed it from the chamber. It was cold to the touch. A perfect, unnatural cold. It felt like holding a piece of the void. You carried it to the emitter array, the final piece of the puzzle. You slotted it into place. The connection was perfect. The machine was ready. All it needed was power. And a key. You ran to the engine room. The reactor core was exposed. A miniature sun held in a cage of magnetic fields. You had one chance to do this. You had to manually override the safety protocols to release all the power in a single, uncontrolled surge. It would vaporize the ship, and you with it. You placed your hand on the final release lever. This was it. The activation station was next to the reactor, a small handprint scanner connected to the echo chamber. You looked at the scanner, then at your hand, the hand that had first touched the geode, the hand that would now unmake it. On the main screen, the Concorde broadcast began. A massive energy beam shot from the flagship toward Keystone 7. It was beautiful, a rainbow of light carrying a message of peace and a payload of death. The planet reacted instantly. The red glow erupted. The entire world turned blood red. The song became a deafening roar that shook your ship to its foundations. The whispers in your head became a single, triumphant shout. "We are awake!" The systems on the Concorde ships began to fail. Their lights flickered and died. You saw one of the golden spheres drift sideways, its engines dead. They were being consumed. It was happening. You shoved the reactor lever forward. Every alarm on the ship screamed at once. The core went critical. A wave of raw energy surged through the conduits heading for the echo chamber. You had seconds. You ran to the activation scanner. You slammed your palm down onto the plate. The scanner lit up. Biological signature confirmed. The whispers in your head recoiled. What is this? What have you done? The triumphant shout became a shriek of terror. They could feel it, the coming of the great silence. Progenitor protocol engaged. The ship's computer spoke in its own voice one last time. Echo chamber is firing. A beam of pure blackness shot from the front of your ship. It was not a laser. It was not energy. It was a ray of absolute absence. It moved at the speed of thought. It struck Keystone 7. For a moment, nothing happened. The red glow remained. The scream of the geodes continued. You felt a flicker of doubt. Did it fail? And then the silence fell. It was not a fading of sound. It was an instantaneous stop. The song, the scream, the whispers, all gone. The red light on the planet vanished. You looked at the world below. Every crystal, every spire, every glowing tree had turned to dust. A fine gray powder settled across the continents. The mountains that had sung for 1,000,000 years were now just rock. The forests of light were now plains of ash. It was a dead world, utterly and completely silent. You looked at the conquered fleet. The strange lights that had infected their hulls were gone. Their systems were coming back online. They were saved. They were confused. They were alive. On your screen, a new message from Elder Prelax appeared. It was not a message of thanks. It was a declaration of war, a warrant for your arrest. He called you a monster, a genocidal killer, the human who had, without provocation, erased an entire sentient species. The evidence of your guilt was undeniable. A world had been silenced. A people had been turned to dust. They had no knowledge of the virus, no memory of the scream. The echo chamber had not just destroyed the geodes. It had erased their final attack from history. All that was left was your action, a seemingly senseless act of cosmic violence. Your ship began to break apart around you. The reactor breach was catastrophic. You had moments before the star glider was nothing but atoms. You did one last thing. You bundled all your data, your logs, the original untranslated song, the progenitor file, the probe's final moments, everything. You compressed it, encrypted it, and you broadcast it on a wide, looping beam aimed at the deep void. A message in a bottle. A final report from the human who had saved everyone, and who would be hated for it forever. The forward viewport shattered. The vacuum of space reached for you. You closed your eyes. You were not a hero. You were not a villain. You were a scientist who had made an impossible choice. You had faced the abyss, and you had pushed it back. But in the end, the abyss was all you had left. You were alone, adrift in the silent darkness you had created.